Well, we love LNG, as you know, that stands for liquefied natural gas. It's a way of condensing natural gas, which is a gas and very voluminous, by cooling it dramatically to put it in those bubble-shaped ships and send it overseas to places where natural gas is very expensive, places like Japan, South Korea. It's a booming industry. The United States is taking advantage of it, and Canada, because of our fracking, has natural gas to export too. And finally, some LNG facilities are being built on Canada's west coast. It's a huge construction opportunity in addition to the ongoing sale of natural gas. In fact, there are projects afoot in BC worth a staggering $42 billion. That would make it, hands down, the largest construction project in Canada. And the fact that it's private sector money is even more amazing. But let me put a fly in the ointment. Let me tell you something terrifying and terrible. This $42 billion project will not be manufactured in the main by Canadians. This will be built in modular form in China by Chinese workers using Chinese steel and shipped to Canada for final assembly. And all of this was made possible by a shocking decision by the Canadian government. And here to talk about it is our guest, Ed Whalen, who is the president and CEO of the Canadian Institute of Steel Construction. Mr. Whalen, it's a pleasure to meet you and have you on the show today.
Oh, it's nice to be here.
Now, I outlined the facts as best as I know them, but of course you're an expert in this field. Can you please correct me or add any information to how I've just described the projects at the wood fiber LNG and the LNG Canada construction? Did I get my facts basically correct?
Yeah, basically you did a pretty good job, probably better than I could have. The LNG Canada project is valued currently at about $40 billion. These types of projects this size usually kind of balloon to about 60 to 80, so almost double if you use Australia as an example. The wood fiber is quite a bit less. It's about $2 billion. So that's where the $42 billion comes from. There's two projects, and there's a number of them lined up potentially in the future, not only in the BC coast, but also in the Atlantic. So there's a considerable amount of LNG activity potential in Canada. And, just to start off, we would love to be part of that. We want the project to go forward. But we as an industry and the construction industry in general would like to see at least a little bit of that activity and construction go to Canadians.
Well, what's so incredible here, and I haven't mentioned this part, and I'm going to rely on your expertise to explain this. This Chinese construction project, I'm going to call it a Chinese construction project, even though it's in Canada, is against the trade rules because the Canadian International Trade Tribunal, which hears cases of dumping where China dumps enormous amounts of steel below cost, below market prices to drive out Canadian competitors. Well, that was challenged at this Canadian International Trade Tribunal, and the Trade Tribunal found against China and said they're doing it illegally. They're breaking the law. And here's what I can't believe, and again, I'm relying on you to correct me because this is so staggering. I'm worried I've gotten my facts wrong here, Mr. Whalen. Is it true that Chrystia Freeland, our foreign minister, waived this tribunal ruling and said, you're breaking the law, an independent tribunal found that, you lost in court, but we're letting you do this anyways? Is that an accurate reflection of what happened?
Yes, unfortunately, you can't get any more accurate than that.
Why? Why would we do this at the best of times? And by the way, these are not the best of times with China. They hold 2 Canadian hostages. What's the official rationale of the Canadian government?
Well, that's a good question, and I think the only ones that can actually answer that properly would be the government. It comes down to cost. The large oil and gas companies, in this particular case, the LNG Canada group, which, by the way, just one of the major partners in LNG Canada is PetroChina, which is a state-owned, a Chinese state-owned company, wants to not only take the work to China, but they want the lowest price possible to do that so they can put more money in their jeans. So the only way you can do and get the lowest price in the world is bring a construction project to a country that illegally dumps and subsidizes their construction products. So here, China now globally is well known as a dumper and subsidizer. Other countries and construction industries in the rest of the world aren't allowed to do that by WTO rules. Otherwise, we have trade cases brought against us. And in our case, in the steel fabrication case, we brought this trade case forward because of exactly these types of projects, not these small little projects. We wanted to protect our industry on large infrastructure, oil and gas mining type projects, and wanted to have a fair, level playing field in order to get some of these projects. Now, we realize if we're not globally competitive, we don't deserve to get the job. But at least everyone should be bidding fairly. Yeah. And our trade case and the duties would be only bringing the Chinese price to where it should have been fairly. Yeah. And the government of Canada decided to waive it.
I just don't understand that. It's not like China is doing us any favors right now. They've banned our agricultural exports. They've banned our canola. They've banned various other crops, let alone their illegal detention of 2 Canadians. I just don't understand it. But I really don't get it on the jobs front either, because the whole point of these LNG facilities is to develop our economy, not China's economy. And I really don't care about PetroChina. They're a state-run enterprise from a communist dictatorship. I have no affection for them. I want to see jobs in Canada, whether that's in BC or in, I don't even know if the steel would come from Hamilton. I don't know where that steel would come from. Tell me, Mr. Whalen, where would the steel come from if it wouldn't be shipped in from China? Would it be in BC? I know that there's some steel makers in Saskatchewan, and I just don't know the market that well. Who's the loser under this deal? What's the communities?
Right. And I just as a clarification, it's important for your audience to know that we have the steel mills that would supply these particular projects. And our industry is the layer down, the ones that take the raw steel and fabricate it into certain pieces and columns and beams in order to build whatever the structure that is needed to be built. And in the industrial space, we have industrial fabricators right across Canada. And if you just look at some of the projects that were going in Alberta, for example, in Fort McMurray, there was steel fabricated right across Canada by a whole number of steel fabricators for the projects over the last 20, 25 years. So the losers here are all of the steel fabricators right across Canada that could have supplied steel, or at least could have potentially bid on these projects. And now, in this particular case, they're not even being asked to bid. Huh. And one of the things that we're tending to lose out of this conversation is that because a module is not only the steel bones and the frame that are made out of the products that our industry makes, but everything in. So a module contains not only the steel structure, but it contains the piping, the tanks, the electrical, the plumbing, all the trades that would build a facility. All those people that used to be potentially across Canada, used to fly to Alberta to do a major project, they're now going to be sitting at home watching the Chinese do it all. And this is what the technology and the mode of construction, of modular type construction, is now going to be facing Canada and the rest of the world, is that it allows projects to be totally offshore.
Jeez. You know, I know this is how China operates in jurisdictions like Africa. They're really colonizing Africa industrially, financially, but also industrially. And I get it. Africa is diplomatically and politically and economically weak. I guess they have to take any terms they're offered. But But for Canada to roll over and say, yeah, we'll accept basically a made-in-China economic project, like a made-in-China mega project, and to accept it that it's against our law and accept it anyways, I find that very hard to fathom. I want to ask who your allies are, because I really haven't seen a lot of voices on this. I should tell you that I was in Ottawa a few weeks ago when Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was visiting with Chrystia Freeland. And I was with other journalists, and I mentioned this issue. Not a single one of the Ottawa Press Gallery had even heard of this issue. Now, I talked to them about it, and eventually that was the question put to Freeland, and she sort of waved it off. I saw Trudeau being asked the same question the other day. He waved it off. Here's a quick clip of that. He answered by talking about the big bad United States. He didn't have a word to say about China. Here, take a look at that.
And U.S. concerns about Chinese steel being dumped in Canada. Has Canada received clearance to use imported Asian steel for these LNG projects? And why not use domestic products instead of importing foreign steel without duties?
We have been steadfast supporters of the Canadian steel and aluminum industries. We knew when the Americans brought in unfair 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum that we had to stand strong, and that's why we brought in dollar-for-dollar countermeasures that ended up being effective. And we got the Americans to lift their punitive tariffs on Canadian aluminum and steel. We continue to support our industry, and we will always continue to support our industry. We're working with the Americans to prevent transshipment as well, and we will always look to use Canadian steel wherever possible in big projects like these.
Mr. Whalen, that's it. By the way, that's the identical answer that Chrystia Freeland gave with Mike Pompeo. They're so on guard against Donald Trump and his trade battles. They haven't said a word about China. I just, where are your friends? Where are your allies? Where are the unions properly engaged here? Are local MPs engaged? Are mayors engaged? I was shocked that the Ottawa Press Gallery really didn't even hear about this.
We're kind of somewhat surprised as well. The press hasn't picked this up. Not quite sure why. You're in the press, and you would probably know better than I would. This is a big, big story. This is tens of thousands of jobs. I'm not sure whether everyone's a little bit lethargic over the last year about hearing about steel, and here we go again. But what the press and what Canadians don't appreciate is that the past of how we used to do construction in Canada is now gone. We used to talk about, even a couple of years ago, even maybe as early as last year, about having a trade shortage. I would say we won't have a trade shortage anymore, because we will not be constructing buildings and structures and heavy industrial facilities here in Canada anymore. We're seeing this technology being brought down from large industrial even into commercial projects. And it's not just steel where it's modular type construction, it's even wood. So the wood industry should be afraid. If you just have to look at the Sidewalk Labs down in downtown Toronto, and Google or Sidewalk Labs announced that they wanted to do all of their construction in modular type construction. Well, there's no reason other than cost why you'd want to go modular. The ultimate reason modular construction is used is for cost, and it's going to pretty well bring most of our construction offshore. So our trades are going to be sitting at home. In the LNG case, right across Canada are trades that used to work in Alberta, which are quite mobile and ready to go wherever these large infrastructure projects are. They're going to be sitting at home watching TV while the Chinese take this type of work away from us. And I just don't know if the Liberals are intending to support the middle class. I would have thought that they would have done everything in their power to make sure that some of this work would have stayed in Canada. Some of it.
Yeah.
But not only did they say it doesn't matter, we're not going to do anything to keep any of these modules in Canada. Not only that, they actually allow them to have a remission on the duties. So it's like a double kick.
Well, that's the crazy thing is it's not like they were taking a political stance. The Canadian International Trade Tribunal made a ruling, and the government just said, oh, you don't have to follow that. I mean, I don't even get it. At least SNC Lavalin, when they were letting them off the hook, they claimed it was for Canadian jobs. I'm sure that there would be more than 8,500 jobs involved in building a $42 billion project. I just have to say, we talk about steel a fair bit on this show, and we talk about how Trump has done a lot of things to bring steel back in America. I really feel I'm living in opposite world. And it would be one thing if the trade bully, so to speak, were Trump trying to get steel jobs away from us. And who knows, maybe we couldn't fight against Trump and America. But for God's sakes, that we're not even willing to lift a finger against China. I'm just perplexed. Let me ask you, is there any chance, is there any legal or political way to undo this? What does the provincial government say? Surely the province of BC, which is allegedly a workers' party, the NDP, surely they believe in local jobs. Is there any word from Premier Horgan?
We haven't heard boo from any of the provincial governments. And again, as you alluded to earlier, we're not quite sure what all the various governments are thinking. In previous governments in BC, they were pro-trade, and if they could offshore it to China for $1 cheaper, previous governments in BC, that's what they would do. In this particular case, I don't know whether we're seeing any difference in opinion there. I think many of the governments have been bamboozled to think that these particular projects are too complex, too big, and Canada doesn't have the expertise. They have yet to show me or tell me what Canadian labor, what Canadian construction companies, and what Canadian trades can't do.
Yeah.
And again, the steel industry in Canada isn't looking for the whole project, but certainly a fair chance. I mean, what I'm hearing from the government and from the LNG world is it's okay, and the only way we can do large infrastructure projects is to go to countries that allow dumping and subsidize, because we have to get the lowest price. And by goodness, some of our other energy policies and other energy files are doing really poorly. So let's just make sure this one goes ahead. Yeah. You mentioned SNC Lavalin. I mean, that you meant 8,000 jobs. I mean, this is tens of thousands of jobs and many, many companies. Yeah. And this is going to have an immediate impact. Last week, on Thursday, I believe it was, we had one of our member companies, one of the largest independent steel industrial fabricators in Western Canada, just announced that they're closing 2 plants. So if people believe that these kind of decisions aren't going to have a negative impact, think again. Yeah. There is no reason to have the capacity in our industry to do large projects if Canada's going to give them away.
Yeah. Well, and that's the whole point of dumping, is flood the market with cheap steel, drive all the local competitors out, and then you've got a monopoly. We haven't even talked about the quality issue. It's been a decade since I've been in Shanghai. That's a city that sprouted up almost overnight. Even when I was in the city, there were newspaper articles back then about how the quality of steel was so cheap that there was so much trickery and fraud that steel was so low quality because everyone was trying to con someone out of a few extra bucks by putting in lower grade steel. They were worried that a quarter of the skyscrapers in Shanghai, and this is a decade ago, were structurally questionable because of fake steel, junk steel, counterfeit steel, and anyone who's ever seen where all the counterfeit brands in the world come from, it's from China. The fact that we would be importing steel of questionable provenance, and this is not a conspiracy theory or a defamation of China. This is how they operate in a low trust society. I can't believe we're bringing in Chinese steel of questionable quality for something that's important as an LNG plant. Listen, you've really got me revved up here, and I'm going to look into this more. I think we've got to ring the alarm about this. I find it very odd that we really don't come from that world, but the more I see about this, the more I'm upset with it. Give me one last thought. What's your advice to viewers who are waking up to this issue like I personally am? What should we do? Who should we talk to? Who are potential allies? What are questions we should ask to people? Just give me a hand here, because I'm learning as I'm going.
Yeah, I would say that for one, if any of your listeners are in the construction industry, and especially running businesses or employees, we should be very, very concerned. I mean, this is very, very troubling. It's going to get even bigger and larger. And if the government is willing to take a $40 billion job, then a tinier job at only 40th of the size, and give that away from China, we're going to have to wonder what else are they going to give away.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you taking the time with us today. I've learned a lot from you. In fact, just your press release itself contained background information I had not seen before. I seek to educate myself in this matter because I watch with some envy the revival of American industry, especially heavy industry, and I'm thinking, why can't that be us? And I think that's something we have to fight for as much in the steel industry as we would. I mean, I'm an Alberta boy originally. The oil and gas industry, that is a steel industry. I'll stop now because you've been generous with your time, but I hope we can speak again another day.
All right, thanks so much for hearing.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you for that. We've been talking with Ed Whalen. He's the president and CEO of the Canadian Institute of Steel Construction. That's an excerpt from the Ezra Levant show. Every day I do a video monologue and then I interview an interesting guest, and then I end by reading my hate mail. But you've got to subscribe to it, which you can do at therebel.media/shows.